Hey, everybody. Welcome yet again to High Side, Low Side. My name is Zach. I am joined, as always, by Spurgeon Dunbar. How you doing today, Spurge?
Good, man. I'm all riled up to talk about motorcycles with you and our guest today, who is going to be Jen Dunstan. And appropriately, we are going to be covering the what is it going to be? The big, tall, and small, I think, is the way that we rhymed it all together. I'm representing the big, you're representing the tall, and then Jen's going to represent the small. And we're going to talk about all things ergodynamics as they compare to different motorcycling types, and then the size of the rider that might be on the motorcycle.
That's right. Best and worst bikes for people that are tall, small, everywhere in between, beginners, long distance, city bikes, sport bikes, dirt bikes, whatever.
Let's not give it all away. Let's build some of that suspense up. Yeah.
Okay, you're right. Sorry. We're not going to talk about any of that. It's going to be super exciting. We're also going to give away a T-shirt and cover listener comments from you, our faithful viewers and listeners.
But before we get into any of that, let's get in a word from our loyal sponsor, Motul.
Our sponsor, Motul. That's M-O-T-U-L. Just in case anyone didn't know how to spell Motul. And as usual, we just want to give a tip of the cap to Motul. They give us the money that we need to produce this podcast. If you're listening to this podcast and you're one of the people that has not given us a 1-star review, that means you enjoy High Side, Low Side. So keep it in mind next time you're shopping for oil, lubricant, chain cleaner, something to clean bugs off your visor, whatever. If you support Motul, you are ostensibly supporting High Side, Low Side. So thanks to Motul, and thank you for keeping that in mind.
And also, Motul has the same amount of letters as horse. So if you and your kids are going to go out and play some basketball after work, maybe you play around a Motul instead of playing around a horse. It works exactly the same way.
That is the best non sequitur Spurgeon Dunbar has ever. I love it. That's great. Hey kids, you want to go down to the park and play a little Motul? That's what we are contractually obligated to do with our nieces and nephews. For what it's worth, we have to play Motul. It's in the contract.
So all right, let's move right along to the T-shirt winners for the day.
Yes, indeed. This is where we please. We suggest that you leave a review for us on Apple Podcasts because that does us a world of good, and it allows you to give us feedback on what we're doing right and what we're doing wrong. As usual, our motif on High Side, Low Side is to go into the podcast reviews, pick one that we like, that we think is funny, creative, makes us laugh or cry, and that person wins a T-shirt. Who's the winner this time around, Spurgeon Dunbar?
We've got one winner today, and for those of you that are loyal listeners, you know that we sometimes fluctuate with one winner or two winners. Today we got one winner, and that winner is Mo Dugno. Mo Dugno says, love the show, currently deployed in the VTARNG 802 shout out to Zach. So I'm assuming he's somewhere in Vermont. And the VTARNG, what is this, Zach? You're a Vermont local. What does that stand for?
Deployed. So I got that. That's Vermont Army Reserve National Guard.
I'm pretty sure that's what we figured it out was going to be. So nice on the acronym there. Listening to this show brings back memories of good times on two wheels and makes me excited for the better days ahead when I can get back on my bike. Keep up the great work and can't wait for the next episode, John. So John, thank you for writing in. Thank you for your service to our country. Thank you to all of the active military that is out there listening to High Side, Low Side. And John, you earned yourself a T-shirt, so make sure you send us an email to highsidelowside@RevZilla.com with the size and the address you want it shipped to, and we'll make sure you get a free shirt.
Yeah, and shout out right back at you, John. 802. That's the area code in Vermont. That's what he meant, by the way. 802 shout out. And there's only one area. There's only one area code in Vermont.
Yeah, if
it's a small state.
Yeah, I would say if you've listened to our previous episodes, you know that Zach grew up as a very lonely boy on a farm in Vermont.
I did, which perhaps John does well.
Riding his BMX bicycle by himself, pretending he was on any Sunday, just riding around.
Pretending it was Sunday, exactly. All right. Thank you so much for the review, and I'm glad you're enjoying High Side, Low Side, John. Next up, we're going to talk through some news. And first up is yet another shout out to the Pediatric Brain Tumor Foundation. charity, which Spurgeon and I are participating in a competition, and you can too.
Yeah, so a lot of you have already started to send in your sign-ups. So really what we're doing here is that we are raising money to help fight cancer. All you need to do is sign up at rideforkids.org/ride, and you can start collecting donations. We are going to have an official ride day on September 12th, but basically the competition is going to run from August 12th to September 12th, and Zach and I are competing to see who's going to ride more miles. I think so far I've raised more money. I'm not going to speak to who's ridden more miles, but I'm just saying I think I'm winning as far as the money that I'm raising.
The whole time it's been how many miles can you ride? It's a competition of how many miles can you ride. And once we get into the competition, he's all, oh, I think I've raised more money. We never even talked about that.
In fairness, it's been my family. It's like my aunt, my mom, my cousin's wife. But anyway, so if you wanna join us, please screenshot your sign up page. If you're watching this on YouTube, our editor is gonna put a little screenshot up of what it looks like. Email us that page at highsidelowside.com. So take a screenshot, send it over to highsidelowside@RevZilla.com, and we're gonna pull one random winner. And to thank you all for riding with us for the month, we are gonna send that one random winner a Motul gift bag, if you will. Some oil, some chain cleaners, some cleaning products to clean your bike off. We're going to make sure that you get taken care of. And that's, again, courtesy of Motul, our wonderful sponsor. But now, Zach, let's get to some other popping news.
So, first item of business here is Harley-Davidson launching an online marketplace for used motorcycles, which we've talked about. I think we touched on briefly that Triumph and Harley and maybe one other brand that is slipping my mind right now.
Those are the two that I remember.
They're right. So they have certified pre-owned programs. Yes. Which in the automotive world is commonplace now. You can get certified pre-owned BMWs, Infinitis, Toyotas, whatever. They've branched into that. But this, Spurgeon having worked in a dealership, this was relatively seismic, which is the fact that they have created an actual place where people can go. Is that accurate?
That is correct. From what I've researched, and I actually played around on their website the other day, you can go to harleydavidson.com, and they actually have a marketplace, which, from what I understand, it basically pulls from their dealer network, but you can actually shop used motorcycles now directly on harleydavidson.com, which is, I mean, it's a pretty revolutionary step forward. Before you went to Cycle Trader or you went to eBay if you were shopping online. Those were the two large marketplaces. You might have browsed your local Craigslist or your local Facebook marketplace. But now you've got a national database that pulls from all over. Now, I've not bought a Harley Davidson off of this, so I don't know how well it actually works. But it seems like they're starting to get that ball rolling. And the only reason I bring this up as news is that it'll be really interesting to see if other manufacturers, come into play with this. And also keep in mind that, like, what if there was a KTM 890 that popped up for sale in California, but I found it on my local dealership? I wonder if there'd be some kind of a way to include, like, if I bought it there, if they would transfer it to a local dealership. There's a lot of potential here, and I like where they're going with it. That's all I'm saying.
And we can check the box where Spurgeon talks about KTM during the podcast.
We
didn't even get to the actual podcast.
There you go. We're done.
We're done.
All right, so the next one, I know there's something that I'm actually looking forward to hearing more about this because I wasn't aware of this until you brought it up the other day. So educate us, Zach.
So the story is, it's not clear to me actually how newsworthy this is because I found a Newswire story about this, and our producer Chase actually pointed out that it was from 2019 or something. So I haven't done all my research yet, but they're testing noise cameras in France, which was brought up recently by a European journalist, maybe he's British, on Twitter, and it was a recent story on a French website. Even though this story, like I said, goes back a couple years, but they're testing noise cameras in France where they have decibel meters. And if they get triggered, it takes a picture. So like a speed camera, right? You go buy a speed camera and you're going 55 and a 35, and it takes a picture of your license plate, and they send you a ticket, which is, we can probably all agree, not our favorite thing. However, noise cameras will sense a motorcycle or a vehicle being too loud and take a picture of the license plate, and then you'll get a citation or a warning or a ticket or whatever. And like I said, I'm not like advocating for I find speed cameras kind of obtrusive sometimes, so I'll admit that. I also, however, find it very obtrusive when motorcycles are too loud. or vehicles in general. Like, dude bro's got a Charger with like straight pipes on it, and he blasts through my neighborhood, and I don't enjoy that. So I'm interested to see how this goes, because I would be okay if the ear-splittingly loud vehicles in the world were tamped down a little bit.
Are you saying that you don't think that loud pipes save lives?
Well, this is difficult because loud pipes have saved my life, but I don't know. I can't speak for everyone, you know. No, I get the whole loud pipe save lives thing is a whole nother podcast, you might say.
Yeah. Let's not get into that there. I think
the point is, like, I would my personal motorcycle is not especially loud, but it does have.
You got an Akrapovic exhaust on it.
Yeah, I do. It's not insane. It's just like a little louder than stock. The point is, if someone said, I think your bike is too loud, and I would appreciate if it was quieter, my reaction wouldn't be like, to heck with you.
F yourself. I live in America.
Exactly.
Now, I shouldn't have flipped off the camera either. Now Bernie's got to put the little blur signs up too. But yeah.
Anyway, I would say, yeah, that's fair. Especially, I mean, like, I think you've been at like out to dinner or like
it's so
breakfast
annoying.
or something, and like 6 Harleys pull up with like
so annoying,
unbelievably loud exhausts. And
you're
like, I can't have a conversation anymore.
I was going to a birthday party with a friend, and there was like this little town square in this adorable little town where we were all meeting, and like these Harley Davidsons pulled up, parked, intentionally didn't turn off their bikes, and then started revving their engines into like a little park area where people were sitting and eating with their families, and like. It gives us all such a bad reputation. So anyway, here's what I'm gonna end this news, because otherwise this does become a whole other podcast.
It does. You're right. We got to move on.
Yeah. If there's anyone in France that is listening to this podcast that has more information, please just shoot us a brief email to highside@revzilla.com. Let us know how this is actually being implemented and what it looks like from your perspective, because I would love to hear from someone that actually has some boots on the ground.
Yeah. Speaking of France, really quick news item. Again, do you remember how there was that thing? I think we talked about this on High Side, Low Side. They did a test in a district or a territory in France, I forget, where they made lane splitting legal, and then they tracked the data of accidents and like trying to see if it's actually safer. Do you remember that?
No.
Maybe we can talk about this on High Side, Low Side.
No, anyway. I'm intrigued. That's my intrigued face. It's like, tell me more.
You look intrigued, I have to say.
Mm-hmm.
They did that anyway. And the data was kind of inconclusive. Well, if it was conclusive, it was to suggest that lane splitting was not actually safer, which is, not something that I would be super proud to report because I believe in it. The point is, I just saw that they're expanding the test. They're doing it again. They're gonna do it in more districts or territories or whatever the terminology would be, and keep this test rolling along. So I'll be interested to see how that goes. Only because France came up. Just a quick
think
aside.
that we should test it everywhere. I would like to test it on the Schuylkill Expressway every morning when I'm riding into work, because I would very much enjoy being a participant in that test. All right, so let's move on to, for those of you that are listening to this and you haven't seen it, Ari Henning got to ride the brand new 2021 Aprilia Tuono V4. He wrote an article about the V4 and the new Tuono factory editions that were released. He got a great ride on it, and the article was fantastic. This is a bike that I know that Ari used to own a Tuono. He had a lot of experience with this, and I think he was, the perfect one to speak a little bit to it.
He had a long-term test bike.
Oh, I thought he owned it. No?
No. There were points in the article that made it seem that way. But we got used to saying like, my bike, when we have a bike for a year, we used to do long-term test bikes where we had them for a year or 10,000 miles, whichever came first, basically. So you have a bike for 8,000 miles or 10 months or whatever, and you're like, you're changing the oil and you're changing the tires. Yeah, exactly. You just sort of say like, oh, that's like my BMW, even though it's kind of not. But anyway, yeah, he spent a long time on Tuono RR in 2016 model year, I think. Anyway, very experienced Tuono rider, that Ari Henning, and he did a bang-up job on the write-up. If you want to learn more, you should check it out. Again, while we're on the topic of Ari Henning and Common Tread articles, he also wrote a comparison piece between the BMW R18 and Harley Softail Slim, which also an enjoyable read for those of you interested in reading.
I was about to be like, it's not out yet, and then I realized that it comes out tomorrow, but by the time this podcast releases, it will have been out. So you, my friend,
Correct.
are quite a wizard when it comes with, doing this stuff in your head. So that is absolutely correct. You should check that article out last week.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay. Cool. I think that sums up the news. We should get. Well, we have one more news piece, but we want to get Jen's take on it. So we should get Jen Dunstan in here and get this podcast a rockin' for real.
Jen, welcome back to High Side, Low Side.
I can't believe you guys actually let me come back after the last one.
What? What's that supposed to mean? Did you feel your performance was underwhelming?
No. We fought about MTO7s and everything else. I thought I was banned. So
yeah, I mean,
good to be back.
Speaking candidly, it wasn't our choice. If it was up to us, we were gonna kick you off permanently. But the listeners wrote in emails, and they very much enjoyed having you on. So Zach and I were forced to acquiesce and bring you back on.
Well, let's be honest. I know our topic of discussion today, and you guys are pretty limited on who you could pull from staff that's going to have this insight.
Yeah, I mean,
Look,
we definitely wanted the small representative to truly be a small representative.
Yeah.
Short people unite.
Don't think that that's the only reason. You'll be back whether you like it or not after this as well. So first item, the last news item we were going to cover is something that we wanted to get your take on, and I'll let Spurge take it away.
Jen, we're looking at a couple of different things happening right now in the news, and we just wanted to kind of include you and get your opinion on this because it was something that you would have been included in. So we had talked about going down to MotoGP in Austin, Texas. We had talked about doing a live episode in MotoGP, but unfortunately, they've kind of limited capacity. IMS in New York has been canceled for IMS Outdoors because of all of the recent variants of the Delta virus. And really, we just wanted to get your thought. Is it Delta coronavirus, Delta variant? Coronavirus, Delta variant. The Delta virus. You guys know what I'm talking about.
It changes every day.
It changes
the
every
corona
day.
variant of the Delta virus.
Exactly. Anyway, just wanted to get your thoughts on us having to bail on MotoGP and also what this really means for the industry with some of these shows now again getting canceled and getting reduced in size.
I mean, it's unfortunate, but I think all of us need to do what's in the best mind of everyone's safety. And large gatherings are always going to be a little iffy in this day and age. I feel like if everyone's following the guidelines and we're wearing masks and we can do things responsibly, then let's go ahead and do it. But if there's concerns that the larger population at an event isn't going to be able to adhere to those guidelines, then, I support these organizations and events doing what they need to do to protect their staff and protect spectators. I think it's nice that they care about everyone's well-being. So while it's unfortunate things might get canceled, we can't go to the things we want to go to. It's far more important that we keep everyone safe. So.
Are you disappointed that you're not going to get to see Rossi on his last hurrah?
I am actually really disappointed. I was definitely one of those people. I was hoping he would just kind of do like a farewell tour, like he'd stay on like another season, just so like all the fans could come out. But I also understand where he's coming from. Like he's a racer's racer, and he's not out there to be not in the top 10 and not this and not that. And sometimes you just got to call it when it's the right time to call it. So I don't think he's wrong for doing what he's doing. Just as a longtime fan, I'm like, oh, I missed it.
Yeah.
Yep. He'll still be at the track. He's still going to be in orbit and around. So I wouldn't be surprised if there's like some sort of reason for him to get on a bike and ride around at some point.
I had made a comment. Lance had written an article on Common Tread about Vinales getting suspended again for his contention between him and Yamaha.
Super weird, yeah.
And I had put a comment on there. I was like, well, maybe they could just bring Valentino back and just have him race for the factory team for the remainder of the season. And Lance was like, no. So like Lance was like, just like, absolutely not. He's like, that you're an idiot for even suggesting that. I'm like, come on, like as a PR stunt, like that would be a great like marketing PR push.
Yeah, it really would. And then whatever. Yeah, I agree totally. But yeah, I agree in general. I think the only thing I'll add to what Jen said about the event stuff is you got to know that people and organizations that are putting on big events are the last people that want to cancel or subdue attendance at places like this, like the people that run Coda running a $400 million facility that can, has capacity for thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of people. You got to know that they're the last ones that want to be like, we probably shouldn't have too many people here. So if they're making that decision, then you got to know that the data and their backs are against the wall, basically. So it's almost certainly the right thing to do if they're choosing to do that, because they stand to benefit from getting, selling tickets and stuff. So.
But live attendance aside, there's definitely a lot going on in MotoGP right now. So, luckily you can still watch it on your television from the safety of your couch, and you can do so while drinking a beer at 10 o'clock in the morning, and no one's there to judge you. So that's always important.
You can do so while drinking a nice quart of Motul oil. Yeah. Thank you so much again to Motul, our sponsor.
Oh my Lord! All right, so let's get
into it. Just to be clear, don't ever drink engine oil, people, so that we don't have to put up a disclaimer on the bottom of the screen or something.
The fact that we live in a litigious society where that has to be said is hilarious. But anyway,
kind of a bummer.
We're sitting here talking about the right thing to do for whatever reason, and so sometimes it has to be said. All right, so we want to talk about just diving into the variations in motorcycles of like, what makes something good for tall riders, for large riders, for small riders? Like, what do we each look for when we're trying out a motorcycle that's comfortable for us? I know personally, there's so many comments in my articles where like there'll be a press photo of me riding like a Ninja 400, and people are like, "You look horrible on that bike," and I'm like, "That's hurtful." I feel comfortable on it, but it's hurtful that you want to say that. So I think for us, there's a lot that we can dive into and unpack. And I think I want to start with like considerations for short distance riding. So if you're just hopping on the bike for like around town use, and I want to always, guest honors, and we're going to start with you.
Yes.
But like if we're thinking about a great bike for a shorter rider for just around town, short distances, what's your go-to? Like, what's your favorite bike? What are some of the considerations you make when thinking about that?
Well, if we're talking short distance, it's going to be a lot of cityscape, like a lot of stop and go and things like that. Like, honestly, that's where the vulnerability will come with seat heights and being able to touch the ground and stuff. If you're going long distances or track riding and you don't have to touch the ground a lot, like you could get away with a lot. But when I'm doing a lot of stop and go, I do want like a lower seat height. I want a lighter bike. I want something that's quick and maneuverable. And that also just lends itself to city riding in general. There's a lot of quick stop and go. There's cars coming out at you, pedestrians. Like, you got to be quick to react. So the lighter and the shorter it is, the happier I am for that kind of city riding. Yep. So a specific bike, I mean, it's, all right, now I'm going to go totally against what I just said. I love a supermoto. I love a supermoto in the streets. And actually, to be fair, it's pretty much a lowered dirt bike. So depending on which one you get, like you might figure out that seat height dilemma there pretty well. But again, it's such a responsive, and it's always so much lighter weight than like a traditional street dedicated machine. So,
but it's arguably probably a little bit taller than like a Rebel 500. So like you're kind of you're kind of getting up there in seat height. For what a supermoto would probably represent.
I think the important thing to remember about the category of short distance riding, like you were talking about riding in the suburbs, around town, in a city, whatever, is that you, I think, are less constrained by wanting more power or a bigger bike or better wind protection or something like that. So I think, and obviously you don't need very much horsepower or wind protection or comfort to ride long distances either. But if that's what you want to do, which we'll talk about in a minute, then you're going to be drawn to that. Whereas in the city, it's sort of like, I don't really mind that this bike, to your point, Jen, like a supermoto, like I don't mind that it doesn't have wind protection. I don't mind that it doesn't have, some of the whiz bangs and doodads of other motorcycles, because I'm just riding it quickly. And it doesn't, like, maybe it's super vibey when you're holding it steady at 75 miles an hour, but that's not what we're talking about here. So I don't have to have that as a consideration, which I think like opens up, smaller bikes, smaller displacement bikes, smaller engines as a reasonable path forward.
So
Zach,
as our tall representative, Zachary is the tallest among us. Or we're close, but Zach, let's just give it to him for the purpose of this podcast. So Zach, what would be a bike that you would gravitate towards for shorter distance riding?
Well, I think so I own a supermoto. It is not small, but but it's the reason that I bought my KTM 950 Supermoto when I lived in San Francisco. And for those of you unfamiliar with the specific geography of San Francisco as a city is 7 miles by 7 miles. So it's very small. And you don't I bought the bike so that I could explore outside the city as well. But what I really liked about that bike was it was so fun between 15 and 50 miles an hour. So at low speed, it was just great. More to the point, I often recommend dual sport bikes for tall people who want to ride around urban or suburban environments, because I feel like if you're above 6 feet tall, you're likely to not have a problem with the seat height, and what you get is a lot of maneuverability. It's small, it's easy to maneuver, whether you're in your driveway or whether you're going into a parking spot or whatever, and you get lots of suspension travel for potholes and that kind of thing. You sit up nice and high, so you can sort of like see over the cars can see you. Plus, if the short distances that you are riding around are around Boulder, Colorado or something like that, then a dual sport will also expand your radius and allow you to like go down some trails and stuff. I don't think you really give up much with a dual sport around a city. In some ways it's better.
I think it's important to note for our listeners that the Supermoto that Zach's talking about is not the same Supermoto that I'm looking at that Jen's talking about. Zach has a
That's true.
950 KTM that they put an SM behind the 950 and they called it a Supermoto because it had 17-inch wheels. Jen, I'm suspecting that you're probably talking something that looks more like a dirt bike but with 17-inch wheels.
Yeah, something 300 to 500 cc's would be plenty for me.
Like not for Zach,
that KLX. No, I need it to be big. No, I don't know why I was shopping for a Ducati Monster, to be honest with you, and then I found that 950 Supermoto, and I was like, ooh, this is kind of like a Ducati Monster, but like a little cooler, and I like, whatever, doesn't matter. The point is, you're talking more about like Kawasaki KLX 300 SM, Jen, right? You went to that press launch, and I feel like you liked that bike. That was like
that would be a good choice. Yeah.
What are your thoughts on scooters, Jen Dunstan?
I mean, I've ridden a couple in my day, but I've never chose to add one to the garage.
Yeah. Well, you don't have where you live doesn't really lend itself to scooters, does it?
Definitely not. Definitely not. But yeah, if you're a city goer and you just need to get around fast, like I could see how that's a big advantage, and also just more comfortable and just more slapdash and go. I feel like there's like a lot less prep and prepare yourself to get on a motorcycle. I feel like could take a little bit more than a scooter sometimes. So.
Yep, that's fair. Yeah.
I want to weigh in as the big guy in the group because I've heard the question so often from people that will shoot me a message on Instagram or they'll reply to an article and they're like, and this goes back to the joke that I was making earlier, where it's like, you look ridiculous on that motorcycle. You can't be comfortable. It's just you're so big. So if you're watching this and you're thinking to yourself, man, like I really like this bike. I'm just starting out, but I'm too big for it. That's not a real thing. Like Zach mentioned scooters. Like I got around East Nashville on a little Metropolitan 50. That was a hoot. I wouldn't have taken it on the highway, but I had a good time with it. One of my favorite bikes to ride around Philadelphia is we have that little CSC 250 little cafe standard looking thing. And it's super pleasant to ride around the city. It's not pleasant to ride long distances. I can promise you that. But for me, if I'm just riding around the city, I find that low displacement is more enjoyable than large displacement. And I find that a smaller size is usually more enjoyable than something bigger. So for me, I would say more of a traditional motorcycle. And for that could be, a naked sport bike, something like an FZ07. It could be a Triumph Bonneville. It could be a Street Twin. But that's where I gravitate towards. And I guess all I want to kind of get across is that, like, don't let your decision be dictated by, a picture of how you look on it.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And you bring up people who you mentioned someone starting out. And I feel like that's a question that I've also gotten a lot of on social media and so on, as you have, I'm sure, Spurge, where someone says, like I'm 6'5", 240 pounds. And I want to like get my first bike or something. And I do think that dynamic changes for, I've had people say like, is a
Hayabusa?
Yeah. No, they've said, I forget what the bike was. I think it was a Versa 650. The guy was like, is a Versa 650 too big? Like, is that too much bike for me to start? Like, I don't want to get something little because it just doesn't fit me. I don't feel right on it. It feels weird. It's too small. I don't have room to move around. And like, but I also know that people say like, don't get a 600 or a 650 or an 800 or a 900 cc bike as your first bike. So like, am I doing it wrong? And I think that conversation is worth having, because if you are larger than the average bear, then there are plenty of bikes I think that are reasonable to buy. They might seem like they're too big to start, but realistically they're probably not, as long as the machine feels reasonable underneath you.
Right. So I get the question a lot specifically around the Triumph Bonneville, where it's like, is this bike too big for me as a beginner, right? Or the Street Twin? And for me, that was my first bike. But at 6'3", 220, 230 pounds, like, it was a much smaller bike for me to ride. Whereas opposed to like, if Jen was just starting out, Jen, I'm guessing if I gave you a 600, 550 pound, Bonneville as your first bike and your first experience, that would probably be much more intimidating for you than it would be, for me.
Yeah, certainly.
It probably would have ended poorly as my first bike. Because let me tell you, I learned a lot on that first bike.
Your first bike was a Rebel 250, is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Honda Rebel 250, and trust me, I dropped that thing. I learned everything on that bike. It's done some work.
So, go ahead. Sorry.
I was just gonna say, for all you taller new riders out there, like Zach and Spurgeon have been talking about, the world's your oyster, man. Like, if you want to ride a small 250, then like do it. And then, but also you have the benefit of a 650 or whatever else. Like, you're tall enough and you can manage it. Like, great. Like, I feel like the options are limitless. And don't let anyone, make fun of your photos, and that's why you don't ride it. Who cares? When you're riding, like, I don't think about how I look on the bike, honestly. It's not till after I see the photos I'm like, oh man.
Yeah. Well, here's a spoiler alert also. If you're worried about looking cool on a motorcycle, you don't look as cool as you want to look, as you think you look. You don't.
Never,
none of us do.
never.
Never.
It never meets the fantasy.
No, you're always sort of like, man, I bet this, and you see a photo or whatever, and you're like, yeah, okay, well, it could be better, but whatever.
But I also want to throw this out too, because I made the joke earlier about the Hayabusa, but we get the question a lot of like, also, I'm a big rider. I can't start off on a Street Twin or a Versi 650. Yes. I need 1,000 cc's because I'm a big guy. I can promise you that I could ride a Kawasaki Z400 every day for the rest of my life and never feel like, you know what, I probably need something bigger. Like, there's a lot of fun to be had with these small displacement bikes. Yeah. So, like, there's 40 horsepower or 50 horsepower is still a lot of pizzazz on something that weighs 400 pounds, regardless of whether you weigh 200 or 300 pounds. Like, there's still a lot of power to be had there.
That's true. And I guess the only point that I was trying to make is that I don't want. I've had people that seem really tentative about, like, they've heard so much rhetoric around, I need the bike to be small if it's going to be my first bike, but like, I don't like how it feels like I'm too big.
Sure.
And like, is it unsafe to get a T7 or a Versus 650 or a KTM 690 Duke or whatever as my first bike? And my answer to that would be no, that's not silly. It's okay that you're allowed to like go in that direction also. But your point is valid too.
No, but I think there's a really and this is going to take us into the next category, but if your plan, like, let's say you live out in the suburbs or you live out in a rural little town in Kansas somewhere, you're probably, and if you're just riding around town, then to Jen's point, like, your world is pretty much the oyster. You can get something small, you don't need something big. But if you're, and then the same goes for the city, but if you're out in the middle of nowhere or you're in the city and you want to get out of the city or you want to get out of the middle of nowhere and you want to start taking some trips and some rides, that's where that extra displacement, that extra weight does begin to give you a bit of an advantage.
So before we move on, let me put something to Jen, because we didn't dive super deep into her answer. So you mentioned a supermoto, Jen, as something that I feel like that's something that you would gravitate toward.
Me personally, yeah.
As a person who you're not, we should talk about this specifically. How tall are you exactly?
I'm 5'4".
Okay, so good baseline for someone who is.
What's your
not
inseam?
Gifted with a lot of natural height. Spurgeon, Jesus, you don't ask a lady her inseam.
I think that's
I get asked all the time. It's published in articles. There's no hiding from it now.
I'm asking, what's her inseam? I'm allowed to ask that question.
Apparently, it's controversial too. I measured it.
No, I was totally kidding.
Well, I mean, I think it's 31 inches.
I don't even know. Like, in this
I followed
culture,
the diagram. I followed the diagram, I measured it, and I get called out in comments all the time. They're like, 31 inches, that can't be right at 5'4". And I'm like, I don't know, man. Like I followed the instructions. So I guess when I visit Philly, we'll have one of our professional fitment experts do it, and we'll confirm it's 31 inches. But I'm sticking with that until I've been corrected.
Well, anyway, yeah, I think what's arguably more telling is like your height, because that's someone who's 5'4" can be like, okay, well, that I know approximately.
See, I disagree with that 100%, because if you're 6'3" and you've got a 30-inch inseam and you got a long torso, you're going to have an experience that's closer to Jen's than we are with you or me. Like I have a 34-inch inseam, so like I've got 3 inches on Jen.
Did you measure from your grundle to the ground, or did you are you basing on that on your jean size?
I do it every day just to make sure that I'm not, shrinking.
Where I'm going with this is men's jeans and women's jeans fit a little differently, and a lot of times people just use their inseam measurement from their pants. They'd be like, oh, I wear a 32. So like my inseam is 32 inches.
My actual measured inseam is about 33 to 33 and a half inches. So yes, you're right, Zach. Thank you for pointing it out for the world to see that I'm not a full 34-inch inseam.
Yeah. So to your point,
this is my biggest insecurity, and you're just airing it out all over the place.
To your point, Jen could have a 20-inch torso and then Barbie doll 33-inch legs, and her 5'4" experience would be different than someone else's. That is totally true.
I'm trying to give as much information to the viewers as possible. What's your inseam? 33 and a half inches? 34?
I don't even want to talk about it anymore.
What I want to talk about.
Now. Yeah, come on, Zach. You're going to throw me under the bus for not a true 34. What's yours?
No, 34. Yeah, but that's based on my pants.
Did you measure it, Zach? Did you measure it?
I didn't.
Yeah.
I absolutely did not. So I can sit here and tell you how tall I am, and I think that makes more sense. What I'm trying to get at, Spurgeon, is Jen's recommendation for motorcycles for short people rather than her personal. Like you would pick a supermoto, which is fair because you like supermoto and you're an experienced rider and you're 5'4", and so we've established that.
Yeah, no, I acknowledge that. It's very personal choice, but
if
other
someone
riders,
said, if someone said, "Hey, I'm 5'4" and I want a bike to ride around the city," whatever. I've been riding. It doesn't matter how long they've been riding. They have some experience, between 2 and 10 years of experience, and they are asking you for a recommendation of bike. You don't know anything about them. You don't know their gender. You don't know their age. You don't know what their style of bike they like.
But God help you if they have 11 years of experience. Then your answer is going to change completely. So 2 to 10, that's your range.
I'm going to recommend Spurgeon for derailing podcasts. If you want your podcast to be, if you want someone to come in and completely change the subject every time you finish a sentence, I've got the right guy for you. Try to answer the question, Jen, if you can remember it.
I mean, riding experience is so important, I think, because depending on how long you've been riding or the miles that you've ridden, like you've probably learned some pretty crucial things about operating the controls and balance. And that will change what I recommend to people. So if you're a new rider,
this is an experienced person. They're not new. They know how they've had. Okay. No, they've had a bike or two.
I mean,
they know
either like a supermoto or a smaller sport bike. Just because the stop and go, like what you're going to deal with, it becomes less. Like a 400 or a 300 or something like that, just because of the stop and go. Like I get what Spurge was saying about like the Honda Rebel 500 or 250, and obviously that was a great bike I started on. But when it comes to dealing with the rigors of a cityscape, like I feel like you could do better. Like you could have better performance brakes and a motor that's a little bit more peppy for the stop and go or whatever else.
So how short would they have to be before you say, you should look at a Honda Rebel 500 or Rebel 300 or a Vulcan S, Kawasaki Vulcan S, something like that?
I mean, anyone who is shorter than me and isn't like experienced and like ready to deal with a taller bike, if they haven't figured out like all the special tricks you need to learn as a short person with a taller bike, because once you figure that out, you can make it work. You can make it work on all sorts of different bikes. But if because here's the other thing, you could have 2 to 10 years experience riding motorcycle, like just one motorcycle. It could have been that first bike you bought and you haven't tried anything else. I wouldn't say that prepares you to learn how to deal with a taller seat height or a bigger, heavier bike, etc. It's when you start hopping around and trying your buddies' bikes, or you've borrowed a bike or you've rented a bike. When you start trying other bikes, then you start to learn the baseline of how to deal with a tall bike as a short person. So this is a complicated answer, but
and we're only on short distances.
Yeah, I know. True. Well, I guess I don't know about if you disagree with this trajectory for the podcast, Spurge, but I'd like to hear Jen's tips and tricks for short people riding tall motorcycles right now, so that we don't forget to talk about it.
No, I absolutely. I think that's a great inclusion. I just want to, before we move on to long distance, I do have one point that I want to jump into regarding some of the misconceptions about big people, short distances. But
the misconceptions about Spurgeon's inseam. No,
I don't want to go back to that ever again. But let's go ahead. Let's go ahead and Jen, because I know exactly what you're talking about, because I have a friend, like my friend Liz, who Jen rode with out at Get On Adventure Fest. She's hopped on my 1090 and ripped it around the woods off-road, no problem. And I think she's like 5'6". And then I'll talk to people that are like, guys that are like 6 foot, and they're like, oh, it's still a pretty big, tall, intimidating bike. But to Jen's point, if you know some of the tips and tricks for getting on, off, and moving around, it makes bigger bikes feel smaller. So Jen, why don't you take it away?
Yeah, I mean, you just need to be more strategic is what I've learned. Like, picking out parking spots, parking on inclines or declines, like you're always positioning the bike in a way like you're going to get the upper ground, as it were. I've learned most of my tricks on dirt bikes, honestly, because those are the tallest machines I have to deal with on the regular in some pretty diverse terrain. And sometimes you need to use the terrain to your advantage. So every time we stop on the trail, like all the guys could just pull and stop in the middle of the trail, no problem. I immediately pull up on, the higher banking, or if I see a rock, or at the motocross track, if there's a hay bale, or anything else. Like, I'm always looking for it, because if you don't, I do like this teeter-totter with my feet, doop, 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 like and it fatigues you. That's the other thing people don't understand. Like when you're shorter and you're on these long rides, if you're not planning these stops to be an actual rest period, and if you're stuck there just teetering, that's my muscles, and I'm getting tired. It's like, imagine being in a pool and you don't have anywhere to put your feet down. And you just have to like paddle.
Tread water.
Stationary paddle, it's tiring, and it could be like that on a motorcycle. So you always have to be strategic with your stops, with how you park the bike. And so I've ridden a couple 450s in my day, and I don't choose to ride those, it just happens. And they're extremely tall machines, and their suspension there's never enough give in it that I actually get to touch. I can't even do balls of the feet or tippy toes. It's like I have to dedicate myself to putting one foot down. And that is a technique. Like there's a lot of great videos of other short girls who've broken it down, like step by step, on how to master this. But basically you become reliant on like your dominant foot, and you put that foot down, and your other foot's just like hooking over the saddle like this. And it just takes practice. That's the other thing too. Like you don't just get it one day. Like it took me a while. It took me practice. It took me, again, practicing the 1 foot stand with some help with the terrain, etc. So that's the other thing people don't really consider, is it's going to take time. You're going to drop some bikes. You're going to feel stupid. You're not going to get it right every time. And you will get some muscle memory for the body position and figuring it out, and then it'll all click, and then you start to get really good at conveying that to each other motorcycles you try. But that's the other thing, like you have to try other motorcycles. I have so many friends who, like I said, like they have 7 years, 8 years, 9 years experience, right? But it's been on this one motorcycle, yep. And when they get on this other bike, it's fish out of water, and they don't know how to deal with it. They haven't had to work on that balance enough to get really good at it.
So safe to say that you would recommend that, trying other bikes, I imagine trying a bike that's too tall for you probably helps you feel more comfortable on a bike that's the right size. Also, if you're outside your comfort zone, and then when you go back to your comfort zone, and you maybe feel better about it.
Yeah, and you do better. And here's the other thing: like, not all of your buddies are just gonna like go ahead and donate, especially their nice, expensive street machines for you to give it a shot. But I found in the dirt bike world, there's a lot more acceptance that bikes will fall over and this and that. And dirt bikes are almost always taller. It's some of the tallest bikes I've been on have been dirt bikes. So if you ever get the chance to get out in the dirt, like that's a really great place to learn a lot of these skills of dealing with a taller bike.
Yeah, and it goes back to like even with taller riders, right? So, and I'm really glad that you talked about like the sliding your butt off the seat, Jen, because like even for myself, if I'm riding off road, whether it's on an adventure bike or a dirt bike, as someone that is taller, there's certain ergonomic traits that I like for like my all-day comfort. Like I actually get a taller seat, right? Not because I want to be further from the ground, but when I'm transitioning from standing to sitting to standing to sitting when I'm riding off-road, it's a lot harder to do if it's a low seat because it really puts a lot of pressure on your knees. So when I'm getting an already tall bike and I'm putting a taller seat on it, then all of a sudden, even as a tall rider, I'm sliding off. And like you're coming to stops, and like you were talking about, Jen, on the trails, like in some of these trails, if you're in a rut or a divot, like you got to put your foot down and there's no ground there. So you really have to train yourself to like slide off and put your feet on the ground. And that's something that, you know, while I have to do it off-road, I think you bring up a really good point that for shorter riders, that's just the way that you have to ride. So if you're coming to a stop on the street and you're on an incline or a hill, or even if you're at a completely flat stop but you're on a taller bike, you have to get comfortable moving your body off the bike. We're never, as motorcyclists, truly meant to be just stationary and sitting still.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I mean, it goes back to trying stuff, like spending time doing it. Because just because if you're not quote unquote short, that doesn't mean you're not going to make mistakes with tipping bikes over and putting your foot in the wrong place. And that's an important thing to remember too, that we're all fallible that way.
I want to get away from off-road. We were talking about short distance riding, so I want to bring it back around to one of the biggest misconceptions that I see is I'll talk to people that are shorter, but they're also bigger. So picture this combination, if you will. They've got a shorter inseam, but they're a heavier rider. And their solution to this oftentimes is to find a larger, usually a cruiser-style motorcycle that has a low inseam, and they're like, well, this is easier to put my feet down, so this is going to be my bike for short distance or long distance. And the biggest problem that I have with this is that when you're looking at a bike that while it has a shorter seat height, it also weighs 700 or 800 pounds. For short distance, that's not, in my opinion, a very comfortable combination, right? Like I like a lighter, smaller bike for if I'm just riding around town. I think that it could be argued that that bike is better for longer distances and stability on the highway. But I think one of the things that I would hope that people could realize is that like if you trade off a bit more of a tall seat height for a bike that weighs 300 or 400 pounds less, it's probably going to be more manageable and more fun in the long run than just getting this giant beast of a machine that has a low seat height. So seat height isn't everything is what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah. Yeah, good point. Have you had that experience before, Jen? Have you ever ridden a bike that was like sort of on paper made sense, like a cruiser or something where you're like, oh, like it's got a nice low seat height so I can touch the ground, but it's just more difficult to use? Anything like that?
Yeah, I've ridden, a couple cruisers in my day, like the Vulcan, the Star Bull. I've been on a Harley before, like all that. And I can't remember which one it was specifically, but I'm flat foot and I'm like, oh, this is great, and everything. And then they're like, okay, we're going to park over here. And then I go and I do the U-turn, right? And I'm about to, doggy paddle, walk it back. And it was so heavy, and I managed it, but I didn't anticipate that. So I'm just like, I'm digging in, like the gravel's moving. I'm like, oh shoot, I hope I don't, drop this thing. And that's the other thing about dropsies. I feel like they're far less frequent on a lower bike like that. But man, and we all know what that feels like when you meet that tipping point, right? Where you have to abandon ship. Like it takes a little bit longer on a cruiser to get there, but man, if it gets there, like I'm just getting out of the way. Like I'm gonna flying dismount and get out of the way because it's gonna come crashing down. It's so much heavier. So now that's been my experience.
I would say, for those of you that didn't listen to the first episode of the podcast that Jen was on, Jen, you come from a long family of Harley riders, correct? Like your mom and your dad were both Harley owners.
And still are. Yep.
There you go.
Do you ride mom and dad's Harleys anymore?
No, man, I'd love to ride my mom's Harley, but she's still very protective of that. She
won't let you ride it.
She has not let me ride it. I mean, it's probably not running right now. But I was thinking about texting my dad and like secretly getting it running.
No, because the last time you did this, she made you do all the work, and then she kept it for herself. Again, you have to go back and listen to the first episode that Jen was on with this podcast to get the full story. But Jen's family has a habit of making her fix up their motorcycles with false promises that she's going to be allowed to ride them, and then they rip those promises away as soon as the bike's running.
And then give you a Rebel 250.
They listen to these too, by the way, so that I get to hear about it later. They're like, way to throw us under the bus, Jen.
Well, you can make a very public plea to your mom then, like, I would love to ride your bike, like, if you, I don't know, if you're willing, whatever, if you love me, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
If you
Well, here's another lesson I learned about Harleys in the household, and the couple that my dad has owned through the years, and I think he still has a Dyna Low Glide right now is the current one. And that one's from, I think, like 2002 right now, so it's getting a little long in the tooth. But the clutch lever is always such a struggle from back then. But even I've been in dealerships recently, and I was like, maybe things have changed, but it's still like a big deal for me to manage those clutches. And I can't imagine doing like an all-day ride doing it. I know other women do it, and they're very happy with them, and that's great. But for me, I guess maybe when you've just become so used to the ease of it working on a variety of other motorcycles, it's hard for me to use that Harley clutch lever and not be like, oh, like, why is it so difficult?
It's not just you. I want to go on the record. It's not just you. Like, we had the office street glide, and like after an hour, I'm like, why does it have to be so hard? Like, this is insane.
Okay.
It brings up an interesting point as well, not even just with lever pull, but adjustable levers, which is something that people who are smaller or shorter are arguably more likely to have smaller hands, shorter fingers, and the reach to clutch lever or brake lever can be kind of a problem. Have you ever encountered that? And have you ever encountered a bike that had adjustable levers and you thought, like, thank goodness that it does, because otherwise I wouldn't, something like that?
Absolutely. Like, I always like sing praise in every bike review I do where they have the adjustable levers, because it's, and it makes sense for everyone. Actually, it's not just for shorties like me, like for you guys as well. Like, you have your preferences on where you want the brakes to bite and the clutch point and everything. So it's like, honestly, I applaud any OEM that keeps going down this road of making their bikes like more adjustable for a lot of riders are to be on them. And so adjustable levers is just one, I think, small gesture that goes a long way for every rider, not just short riders.
Do you know what drives me insane though is, like, first of all, I would agree with Jen 100%. Like, I like my levers where I like them, and if I can't adjust them, it drives me up a wall, especially with how cheap it has to be to include adjustable levers on there. But what really grinds my gears is when they make one of the levers adjustable but not the other one.
Not the other.
So like, I can't adjust the clutch lever at all, and it's like banging against my knuckles, but like my brake lever, I can put it wherever I want it. It's like, why would you do that? Why would you give me one and not the other? It drives me crazy.
I can always tell when Ari's ridden a bike that we have around the shop, because we have a pretty major disagreement about where the front brake lever should be in relation to like where it should engage,
Where do you like it?
I like it farther away from the bar than he does. Like, he likes it to be pretty close to the bar and pretty close to his fingers, and I don't mind reaching farther for the brake lever, because it feels like I have more than even with just using two fingers. I have more throw, like more travel in the lever if I really need to pinch on it. So I don't know. It's just like something that I've gotten used to. But I can, like, I'll get on a bike sometimes and I'll put my hand on the brake lever and I'll be like, yep, Ari was on this bike. I can tell.
So
it's spun way in.
Jen, where do you like it?
I'm a little bit middle of the ground, honestly, like somewhere in the middle there. And it's going to depend on the brake too, of course, right? Like, I mean, I've gotten really used to really bitey Brembos, and honestly, I like those far out, and I just go meep, just like with my, just this finger, meep, like that, and it just starts working. I'm like, yeah, I do love that on a sport bike.
Does it make that sound, or do you make the sound for it?
Yeah,
I think that in my head.
If your brakes are making that noise, there's something wrong with them, Jen.
So I think it's important to note too, like, in addition to where you have the lever, like, I'm spoiled because with like the 1090, you could actually adjust. There was a little grub screw, and that actually, it wasn't just about how you're pulling it in, but then it also adjusted like the feel of like how progressive the brake was within the lever. And you see that on a lot of high-end manufacturers, Ducati, Triumph, I think it's like the MC5 Brembo levers are phenomenal. You can really fine tune. So it's definitely one of those ones where I'm with Zach as far as, like, I like it further away. I want the tips of my fingers touching it because I feel like I've got more braking power. But I'm also very spoiled in, like, if I'm riding off-road, I don't want it to be bitey. I don't want it to engage right away. I want to I'm going to have a good long pull before it really starts to brake. But if I'm on the street, it's kind of the opposite. Like, I want to feel it come on instantaneously. So yeah, I think when you start getting up into that level, now we're getting up into a much more advanced conversation of being able to fine tune all the specifics for the independent ways that we each probably attack things.
But more to the point of this podcast in particular, keep an eye out for adjustable levers on motorcycles that you're shopping for, because it can make a big difference, especially if you feel like you have trouble reaching the levers.
It's good for big, tall, and small. So that's one that works for everybody.
So would your recommendation for a motorcycle for someone of your approximate height, Jen, change if they wanted to go long distance? They're like, I want to ride across the country. I want to go to Yellowstone, and then I'm going to go to the Everglades in Florida, and then I'm going to go to Maine, and then I'm going to come back to California. Whatever, something like that. I
want everyone to hold on the edge of their seats. Jen's going to come right back and answer this question
with the best answer you've ever heard in your life.
But we're going to give her 60 seconds to think about it while we listen to a quick word from our sponsor, Motul. All right, so I didn't mean to interrupt. I just wanted to make sure we got the call in the call out in there for Motul. So Jen, I believe Mr. Quartz was throwing to you with a question about long distance. Is that correct, Zach?
Long distance riding, machines for long distance riding for short people. Would your recommendation change, or would you say get a supermoto still?
No, it definitely changes. And that's, I think, because when you're going long distance, like, the less stop and go there is, I feel like the more options you're going to have, because the stop and go is where the tipping point is of dropping bikes and having a lot of issues. If you're like on long freeway stints and you're going the distance and momentum's on your side, like there's so much that can work for you, honestly. And I feel the same day about like track day riding and stuff. Like the stop and go is so fast and done and over with when I go to track days. That's why like my R6 is like probably taller than a stock seat height and all that stuff. And it's because I don't care. I'm just getting on the track and going as fast as I can. And then when I come back in, I'm very strategic again about it. I have a perfect little flight path of I pull in, I put it in its wheel chock, and it's done. And so it's going to be a similar thing with long distance riding. Like you're going from point A to point B, you're doing hundreds of miles of freeway or back sweepers. And again, you can manage a lot more bikes at that speed. So if you're a long distance rider, like for sure, like get a more powerful bike that's going to eat up the miles comfortably for you. Get a comfier seat, get, like some mid-size adventure bikes, I'm assuming would be like really good options there. Like maybe like the 850 you were riding the other day, Spurge, and then like a mid-range like sport bike would be one I would consider, although that might get uncomfortable for a long day. But I mean, I do like a lot of naked bikes. I would just be one of those sticklers that would put like a huge like windscreen on it and totally ruin its awesome aesthetic. I would be that person.
Right. I think it's important to note that like some of those mid-size adventure bikes, what's nice about those is that you can get either lowered versions or you can get lower seat height. Like you can kind of fine-tune those a little bit more than some other models.
Yeah, and I shouldn't exclude cruisers from this as either. Like I get a cruiser on a long distance trip totally. Like I could see how that's a really comfortable and fun option. So
and there are
that opens it up a lot when you don't have to deal with a lot of like the stresses of a city riding, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's a good point. And there's a lot of, to your point, cruisers that have lots of luggage options and stuff. They're aftermarket accessories for mid-size or small cruisers they have saddlebags and tank bags and stuff like that. So if you wanted to, and windshields for that matter. So if you wanted to go a long way, then you absolutely can. Do you have any favorite? But you just rode a BMW G310 GS not too long ago, and I feel like you liked that bike. Would that be your top pick for riding across the country, or what else?
It depends on the ride. Like, am I like if I'm stopping and doing a lot of truck trails and a lot of off-roading, like I think I would choose that because I liked it so much for that kind of riding. But if I'm doing mostly freeway, I probably wouldn't choose the 310. Like I would choose something a little bit bigger, just to eat up those freeway miles with a little bit more comfort.
Okay.
So,
like what?
So Zach, what about you? So let's pivot to the tall for a second. So I think Jen's put some interesting perspective on the small, but like I do want to focus on the other end of the spectrum. So if you were going to leave the city, you were going to leave your dual sport recommendation behind, which I think is a great recommendation. I'm not suggesting otherwise. But obviously taking CRF 250L across the highway, 3 states over probably isn't going to be. Yeah, I've done a 2.5 hour ride straight on a highway on a 250L rally, and it was miserable. And I would never want to do that again. I wish it upon my enemy. But for you, Zach, like what's your go-to for taller riders?
Well, to Jen's point, I think this is where this is a shorter discussion. I think because if you're a tall person and you're looking for a bike to take across state lines, or like on a longer journey, the motorcycling world is your oyster. Like whatever you want, whatever you feel comfortable with, and whatever you like. I would recommend, especially if you're especially tall, if you're above 6'4", 6'5", I would definitely lean toward an adventure touring type bike, like a Kawasaki Versys, a Suzuki V-Strom, a KTM Adventure S, Yamaha Tracer, like something that's like fairly tall bikes, and you can get pretty tall aftermarket windshields for them, and that's really when you're going to be the most upright and you're going to have the most wind protection. And plus, as we talked about recently, Spurgeon, those are the bikes that are sort of taking over the sport touring category anyway. Or I guess you could go full zoot too. You could go with a Goldwing or an Indian touring bike, or an American V-twin touring bike, or something like that. But I think this sort of like quasi adventure street bike, adventure touring bike is where I would point tall people. One quick note I'd like to make about that, because Jen was talking about sort of tips and tricks for short people, and like being strategic about how you stop the bike and whether or not you need to back up and stuff like that, which I think is really astute. One thing that I often do that surprises people is if the bike has an adjustable seat, high or low, for a long distance ride, I'll put the seat in the low position. And that's not because I need to touch the ground, because I can typically touch the ground just fine. But if you put the seat in the low position, the wind protection is inherently better because you sit lower and the windscreen is therefore relatively higher. So I do that on a fair number of big adventure bikes. I'll just put the seat in the low position if I'm going to ride a ways, because I'll get better wind protection for my head, my helmet.
That's so weird, because I do the exact opposite. So I think but I think that makes a good point. Like Zach and I are pretty much the same height, but I think it's important to note that, again, this is where it's like, well, who has a longer torso versus an inseam? Just because we're the same 6'3" doesn't mean it's the same. And also, different people have different approaches for how they enjoy wind protection or they set up their bikes. So there's not a one rule for all. Because I prefer, usually I like a shorter, smaller windscreen, and I like a taller seat. I like the wind protection to hit me in the chest. I don't mind having my head, because I hate the buffeting that happens if you're in between. But I wanted to make a note. I agree with Zach. Like my go-to as a larger rider is probably going to be an adventure bike, just because it is fun, and it's comfortable, and you can do sporty, you can do touring. But the one thing that I want to throw in here is a note, because a lot of times people will write in and they're saying, you're not giving enough love to the American V-twin audience, right? And Jen makes a great point. For a lot of people, that long distance is going to be awesome for, a cruiser. And I've done across Texas on a Road King, and I loved it, right? But the problem that I have with the cruiser segment as a taller rider, and this was very apparent when I rode the Indian Chief, oftentimes the seat is so low that like my knees end up being so high, and then I feel like I'm halfway through a sit-up the whole time that I'm riding, and that's not comfortable for me. Like I feel my belly pushing against my belt, and I'm like, this isn't comfortable for me in any way. So it's not that I dislike American V-twin cruisers. It's that the way that those ergonomics are set up typically aren't comfortable for a taller rider for an extended period of time. I could hop on the Indian Chief and I could go, back and forth for a shorter period and be okay. But as soon as I was looking at, 200, 300 miles down the road, it just wasn't a comfortable position to be in. So I think as a taller rider, sometimes that lower seat height is actually problematic and uncomfortable.
Yeah. Yep. That's totally fair. I remember when you did that Indian Chief review, people were like, "You're too big for that bike," and that bike's big. That's like that's huge, a full size motorcycle. Like it's not, and it was the same thing. Where you were mentioning before, people are like, "Oh, you don't fit on that bike," and you're like, "Yeah, it's not my fault." It's a 27-inch seat height.
But to that point, I would probably say that, like, as far as like small bikes that I fit on better, that gets back to my point. Like, I would rather have taken a long distance trip on a Z400 with a little clip-on windscreen than the Indian Chief, because even though it was bigger, it had better brakes, it had amazing torque out of the engine, the ergonomics just didn't work for me. And I could, if I'm going to look stupid on something, I'd rather look stupid on something that's more comfortable. So,
right? Yeah, fair enough.
I got a question for you, tall riders.
Okay.
Sorry, because we're talking about ergonomics and from the perspective of a cruiser.
Yeah.
Like, let's talk about sport bikes for a minute, because I see it all the time at the track and talking to other taller riders. It's like the cockpit of a sport bike can be like a big challenge for taller riders. Like, it's me being shorter, like, yeah, I'll have to deal with seat height or whatever. And like I already talked to you guys about, I'll just not worry about it at a track day. But for you guys, for doing a whole track day on a sport bike, like, I know some might fit you better than others, but for generally speaking, like, isn't a sport bike a little too tight and binding for you taller guys?
Zach, I'm going to let you go first, because I already know what I want to say, but I'm going to let you, as the track aficionado that you are, start off with this one.
I don't know if I can see the forest of the trees here. When I started road racing, one of my first race bikes was a Honda RS 125, which is like a 160-pound two-stroke liquid-cooled 125cc GP bike that you could buy as a customer from Honda in the 80s, 90s, early 2000s. And yes, that is correct. 160 pounds is how much the whole bike weighs. It's small. It's 17-inch wheels. It's a full-size bike for full-size people, but it is a small motorcycle. And when I was 16, 17, 18 years old, I raced that bike, and I was over 6 feet tall, as I am now, and I was skinnier then, if we're honest. But the reason I bring that up is that I've never really associated discomfort, like on a racetrack. I've never associated a real amount of discomfort as far as like leg room or seat height or anything like that with, like, I'm not thinking about comfort, basically. Like, I don't care. So it's uncomfortable and difficult, but like, that's the part of the thing that you do. Like, it's difficult. Like, you're not racing because it's easy. So I've never really associated those things, but as I've ridden more bikes and as I've gotten, become, writing articles about bikes and that kind of thing, I've definitely grown into like realizing that there are some sport bikes that are much more comfortable, either to ride on the street or even on a racetrack for someone who's, long and tall. So I wouldn't like, as far as being on a track, I don't think it matters that much. It's sort of like you either wind yourself up on the bike and go around the track and have fun, or don't. Like, I don't. It's up to you. But on the street, 100%. Like, sport bikes are so uncomfortable, and I basically never understand. Every time I see someone riding a sport bike down the freeway, I'm like, why are you doing that? You have an R6. I would just like, I don't even know you, and I would tell you to get an MT-09 right now, 100%. It's cheaper. It does better wheelies. It's more comfortable. I don't know, so that's my take.
Before you and Jen start debating over the efficiency of an R6, I want to jump in because I know that's going to be a whole other podcast in its own right.
Well, you just a quick throw to you. You mentioned the S1000RR recently.
Yes. And
you were sort of like, I rode that bike on track and it's wicked, but I didn't like it.
So that's actually, I was going into two different directions. But both of them are going to be focused on an S1000RR as its base. So when I did the press, I had done California Superbike School a few times with the previous version of the S1000RR, and I loved it. I got on it. I was like, this is so comfortable. I fit on it. This is amazing. When I did the press launch for the new one, and I want to say 2019, give or take a year, 2019,
yeah, something like that,
down at Barber. Everybody was raving about it. They're like, it's lighter, it's more nimble, it's yada, yada, yada. I found it to be completely harder to ride than the previous version because they made it more compact. They made it smaller. The handlebars were no longer adjustable. They did that thing where the handlebars are locked into the top of the triple tree, and there was no adjustment, around that. I didn't like the bike from an ergonomic standpoint as a larger rider. So if I was looking at the previous version or the new version, I would go previous version just from a comfort standpoint because it was much harder to ride. Yeah. So I get to Zach's point that, like, nothing's going to be super comfortable on the racetrack, but you're out there for 15 minutes at a session time, like, go have some fun and just, deal with it. But at some point, like, and the example that I'm going to tie in here is I had the opportunity to ride the HP4 race, and when I took it out the first time, they had the seat all the way down, and I went out and I was like, something's wrong with this bike. Like, I am really struggling, and I'm not a Zack level rider or Jen level rider. I'm more of that intermediate track day rider. I go out to get a little bit better, and I like to have some fun, but I'm not going to race or compete or anything in the A level. But even so, like, I'm a pretty competent intermediate level rider, and I was like, I can't even ride this bike like I was riding a Ninja 400 the week before. So I came back in, and they were able, with the HP4, it's super adjustable. They raised the seat up to the top notch. I went back out, and it was like night and day. So for me, and maybe this is because I'm not as skilled as someone like Zack, I find it to be incredibly important to be somewhat comfortable. Now, don't get me wrong. An S1000RR is not my top pick for a street bike. It's not what I want to be riding as a daily rider. But as a larger person, it was much more comfortable for me to be out in the racetrack. But those little changes make a big difference. Like raising the seat up on the HP4 an 1.5 inches, 2 inches, again, huge difference in how it felt and how comfortable it was. So to me, to Jen's point, I think on our side of things, it does play maybe a little bit more of a role than someone that's smaller that can pretty much have free reign of some of these sport bikes that are out there that are naturally more compact for, tighter spaces.
Yeah, that's fair. What about you, Jen? Have you ridden a sport bike that was just too tall? Like that you were just sort of like, I don't even,
or maybe even like too spread out, like
too long.
Like
I don't know.
The triangle was too far for you.
I have noticed that on some leader bikes, like it felt like a little bit too far of a stretch across the gas tank to get to the handle. It was still rideable, but I felt like I wasn't riding to my potential because I was dealing with that. But for the most part, like, it's, I'm lucky because I'm like Danny Pedrosa sized or something, right? Like a lot of sport bikes, like I can fit in there just fine and
I think
get
you're
get
actually
along just fine.
2 inches taller than Danny Pedrosa.
I think you're right. Yeah, I think I am taller than him. But I mean, like, I'm like, I'll take it. Sometimes you get an advantage when you're a short rider. For me, it's been in sport bikes, for sure.
Yep. Yeah, fair enough. Have you ever ridden what about sort of like a beginner intermediate track day person who is like, I want a sporty bike to go to the trail? Like, have you ever ridden any sort of sport style bikes that were particularly accommodating for someone your size that you would sort of like, I don't know, a naked bike or a small sport bike? You have some experience with Ninja 400, for example. Is that where your mind goes?
Yeah.
Or
the Ninja 400 is a great bike. I mean, I also liked the 390 Duke. Like, if you want like more of like a naked style bike, like I've ridden that at the track and had fun. And I know there's a RC 390 and you're like, why wouldn't you just ride that? I don't know. I was handed a Duke and I rode it on the street and the track, and I'm like, if you want something to do double duty and that's kind of like where you're starting from, it's not a bad starting point. So
no, I agree with you. And that goes back to like, I think for larger riders, if I had to make a recommendation, if somebody was coming and saying, hey, I'm 6'3" too, like what would you recommend for a track bike? I would probably lean towards a naked sport bike. I would probably be looking at like a Street Triple RS and be like, try this first. Because I get that you're going to sacrifice some of the aerodynamics that come with a fully faired motorcycle, but most people are going to a track day to get a little bit better and to have some fun riding. And if you're a taller, bigger rider, a naked sport bike is probably going to give you a more comfortable and enjoyable experience overall.
Yeah, I definitely think that. Our producer, editor on the West Coast, Spencer, who was on the last episode, we were at a track day one time, and we came away from the track day. He tried a whole bunch of different bikes that we had there, and he came away. I think his two favorites were a Street Triple R and a Ducati Super Sport. And he rode a Super Duke and an R1, and he tried a whole bunch of other stuff, and he really liked the Ducati Super Sport because he was like, it's just less aggressive. Like the handlebars are higher. There's a little bit more leg room. I like that it has 100 horsepower or 110 instead of 150. It's just like, it suits what I'm trying to do. And yeah, to that point, you should keep that in mind, that you should try to base it on what you feel like you want to accomplish and how much fun you want to have, not on like what's the best or the gnarliest or whatever thing that you can get.
And I think it sometimes with our little group, it goes without saying, but I think it's important to say it for the audience's sake. But like taking a 70 horsepower motorcycle to close to its full potential is typically a lot more fun than taking a 150 horsepower motorcycle to half of its potential.
Yeah. I mean,
Unless anybody disagrees, and then in that
No.
case we can battle it out.
I was gonna stretch the statistics even further. I'm not saying I can take a full Zoot Superbike to its maximum potential, but I can probably, 150, 180 horsepower motorcycle. I can probably get to like 80 or 90% of its potential, and it's still a lot of times more fun, to be honest, on a bike. Like it's not like it just gets easier the better you are. Like those bikes they have so much potential at this point that it's hard to even know who they're made for, to be honest.
Speaking of midway power, is that an R7 behind you, Jen?
Yeah.
Did you get a chance to ride it yet?
I rode it last night, but I don't think that would be a fair assessment. But I was surprised at how much I liked it just from that little stint. And I know all of you guys all the audience know I have R6 at home. We've had a lot of internal debates here about the R7 versus the R6, and I've been a very staunch supporter of the R6. So if I get a decent test ride on this R7, I might have to reassess that first ruling.
Now,
Nice.
let's be clear to the audience, Jen. You don't have a stock R6.
That's true.
What do we have in the garage?
Yeah, I mean, it runs on fuel pump gas. That's always my
What's in the
That's
garage,
the most stock
Jen?
thing about it.
Yeah.
Be honest.
the gas. No. Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's been worked. It's got some really cool stuff on it. I can't lie. It went through the Graves Sport Shop, so
That's what I was waiting for. Yep.
it's pretty well dialed.
It's a Graves R6.
Right. That's
Still
like being
R6.
like, I have a Triumph Daytona 765, and someone's like, "You mean you have a Moto2 bike?" And you're like, "Well, yeah, but it's got a 765 engine in it, so like it's basically, whatever. Like it's sort of like a Daytona."
Okay, guys, you made your point.
So,
Well, yeah. Go ahead, Spurge.
I was gonna kind of pivot to
Yeah.
I know we touched on the off-road aspect of this earlier a little bit, but we touched on it a little bit more dual sporty, adventure-y, supermoto-y. So I do think it's important because we do get a lot of questions from men and women alike. And Jenna, I'm looking forward to hearing some of your thoughts on this because I know you're an avid off-road rider. And I also know that you've been recently testing a bike that Kawasaki claims has been lowered. And I've been watching you on Instagram, tip over from time to time because it's not been lowered quite as much as they might have said that has. But I do want to talk on off-road riding specifically. And we're talking dirt bikes. And I think there's some pros and some cons here in like sometimes it's easier to learn how to ride off-road, but there's also the intimidation factor of like most of these seat heights are like 37 inches. So Jen, what are your thoughts? I mean, you're pretty much one of the most, versed off-road riders of our group. Where do your thoughts come into play on what you like to do with an off-road machine?
I mean, I've owned a ton of lowered dirt bikes. My current FE250 is lowered, and I want to point out that's not such a taboo thing in off-road. Like some people, if I could just really quick touch on this, I'm part of lots of riding groups on Facebook and other places, and it's like Women Adventures Club and this and that, and sometimes in these circles there's a lot of women who short shame, a lot of girls who lower their bikes and they're telling them they don't need to do that and things like that. And I just want to say, if lowering a bike is going to help you continue riding and become a better rider, then go ahead and lower it, and I don't think we should be judgmental about that. I think we should be inclusive and try and bring as many riders into the fold. And if you need to lower your bike for a little bit to get better at it, so be it. Or I've got so many miles on dirt bikes now, and I still prefer to lower it, just because the riding style and things you're going to encounter on the trail, honestly, it helps me out a lot. And I'm not alone in that. There's professional motocross riders like Jeremy and Alex Martin, and they famously have lowered their bikes. They're shorter than I am. They have JGR built them specific lowered adjustable subframes so they can do it. They've allowed starting blocks now on supercross and motocross races for shorter riders because they felt from a safety standpoint they wanted these shorter riders to be able to start upright like all the other riders were, not one leg down from a safety standpoint. So I think a lot of riders don't realize that. There's been a lot of creative solutions for shorter riders, and it's okay. So, and I've seen a lot of it in off-road. So, if you're starting out, it's great to have both your feet on the ground. I started on a TTR 125. It was the perfect bike to start on. and I continue to lower my bikes. I've had a YZ250F that had one of those JGR subframes on it. I was lucky I scored one of those. And then my FE250, it's lowered as well. It's got a lowering link. So
I think it's important to note too that like lowering motorcycles has come a long way. I know for the suspension shop that I go to for my personal 350, they actually will take stock suspension and they'll take them apart and they'll actually lower the internals or shorten the internals rather. So you're not even using a link in that case, and they can lower from 1 to 2 inches. And if we're talking about riding off-road, most of these motorcycles have 11, 12, 13 inches of suspension travel. And I get it, like you're going to sacrifice a little bit of ground clearance, but I very rarely am scraping the bottom of my bike, even in crazy conditions. And if you can sacrifice 1 or 2 inches of that, but gain back all of that confidence, then I think that's 100% more important. And especially with the way that these suspensions are being modified now, or at least the way that they do it where I go at Solid Performance, it functions exactly the same way. So you're not getting like a rear that's squatting down, but the front's still too high, and you're not getting suspension that doesn't perform the way that it's meant to. It's seamless, and it operates as good, if not better, than a stock setup. So I think that that's a great shout out to make.
Yeah, absolutely. So, quick sidebar. I'm going to try and tee you up to part of a conversation that we had off air, Jen. What about people or women that say, like, I started on a 35-inch seat height on a CRF or a whatever X900 to 3500? Like, I can do all that. Like,
you should too.
You don't need that. Yeah. What do you say to that?
I mean, I think that's great. And there's always an exception to the rules, right? And so for any riders who start out on taller bikes and they've made it work, like, I just applaud your success. That's great. But, like I mentioned before, for every one of those stories or other riders I've talked to that have had that journey, I've had at least 5 or 6 other friends who tried to make riding work, and they didn't want to lower their bike because they were told that's the wrong thing to do. They kept falling over. They had such a bad experience trying to learn on a motorcycle, they gave up. Whereas I think if they had just lowered the bike and continued to progress and learn, like they would still be in our ranks and still be happy riders. So again, it's like everyone's got to do what's right for them. And again, I want to kind of stop that taboo of, if you need to lower your bike, do so, and it's okay,
And you while we're on the topic, because I know we're talking about off-road stuff, and I can tell from the look in Spurgeon's eye that he wants to move the conversation along, which is very fair.
No,
because
I'm just enjoying it.
Same instinct, but you also had a lowered SV650, right? So we should mention to people that lowering kits and are available for street bikes as well. And I assume, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I assume that you feel the same way. You'd recommend that if that's what people feel like they should do.
Yeah, I almost had, I would say I owned that bike for 10 years. And for that first 8 years, it was lowered and it was fine. Especially, like, again, it was all stop and go. It was city commuting, street commuting, like all that kind of stuff. And it worked phenomenally like that. It wasn't until I did 2 or 3 track days on it where I started to, like, hard parts for hitting the ground and stuff. That's when I finally, and that's, that's where you find the, everyone talks about, oh, you're going to limit the geometry of the bike when you lower it and this and that. Well, guess what? Like on the street, I just didn't ride that aggressive that it ever came into account. It's not until I got to the track that I discovered that was happening, and maybe I need to make a change. And then I did, I jacked it back, back to stock height, right. and everything was fine. And I was at a point in my riding where it was fine for the street as well. So like we talked about before, like you progress, you get better, you learn the balance points and all that. And then I was ready. So that's all I would just want for any other rider out there. Get comfortable, lower it if you need to, and then that day will come where you could just pop it back up if you need. Or maybe it doesn't. Like me on my dirt bikes, they're still lowered.
Yeah, fair enough.
But at the same time, when you came out and you rode with us, you rode on a bone stock 350 that wasn't lowered, and you had no, like, yes, there were some points where we came to a stop and you're like, oh, I'm tipping. But like
I totally dropped it.
But like it wasn't like it was a shame thing. Like you just like, it fell over, and then you pick it back up, Well,
I'm so used to laughing at myself on the trail now. Like it doesn't even matter. But yeah, 2 of those drops was definitely because I forgot to account for how much taller that bike was, and I went to put my foot down there, there was a deep hole or something, and down it went, and so I just laughed it off and picked it back up, and we kept riding. That wouldn't have, if I had my FE250 out there, that wouldn't have happened, I guarantee you, because I think my mind hadn't adjusted yet to the new tall seat height. So.
Yep. But this gets back to sorry, just real quick, Spurge. This gets back to what we said before about how, like, riding other bike, like doing other things. So when you rode that stock 350 and you went back to your FE 250 and you were probably like, this, I understand why this makes sense for me. Or you might have even recognized things about the 350 that you liked better for some reason. And it broadened your horizons in one way or another.
I had a lot of fun with it, actually. So I'm getting really good at like a foot plant, like, like 180 turn around on a trail, right, with my FE 250. But the 350 was so tall, I just couldn't figure out the point where I would just lay the bike on my thigh, right, and have that balance. So what I was doing was I was like hopping off, like standing next to the 350 holding it, and then just like ripping the throttle and turning around. So I had to fully stand. I couldn't just do one leg. Yeah. So I was adapting and learning stuff. Yeah. But yeah, I got back to my FE 250 and I was like, whew, I could ride to my better capabilities again.
Well, it's funny because even when we were out riding for fun, like we have a habit of like, well, let's take photos and let's do a photo stop. So like we're like, all right, Jen, just go back and forth. So she'd like whiz back by and like do a jump or hit a wheelie, and then she'd like stop, she'd get off, and she'd like lean it over and like turn it around, and like we just kept making her go back and forth and do that. So, but I want to back up for 1 second, and this was actually the look in my eye that Zach noticed earlier.
Gotcha.
But Jen made a really good point, right? Like, so many people hit that struggle point and they try to do it the right way. And I'm putting right in air quotes right now for those of you listening on the podcast, because somebody told them that that's the way they have to do it. So my ask for everyone out there is that if someone is struggling and they're trying to find a way that works better for them, support them in that. Right? Like, I think and this goes back to last episode, Zach and I had read a comment from someone that was struggling in motorcycling and they were having a hard time, really acclimating to it. And we try as hard as we can to be inclusive here at High Side, Low Side, and also here at RevZilla. And that's part of what Jen and Zach and the rest of the hosts here are always trying to do. So we're going to ask the same of you as the audience, whereas if you do see someone struggling, help them find solutions to keep them in the sport. Don't bring the machismo, and this goes for men and women alike, don't bring the machismo of like, oh, you have to do it this way because it's the only way to do it. We live in 2021, and there's a lot of great technology out there that allows you to accommodate for, some of the things that are natural, shortcomings with individual riding styles and personalities and body types.
Yeah, very well said.
Bravo.
Spurge, I want to throw it to you. Being the representative of the big and tall, I hope you don't mind me saying so.
No.
Off-road machines. Anything to keep in mind? Is it just like whatever one you think looks the coolest, or have you had experiences?
It has to be orange. Like that's
right. Yeah, obviously. Okay. All right.
No, it gets back to what I talked about earlier, right? I think we underestimate foot pegs, seats, and handlebars. Just because the bike comes stock with something does not mean that that's how you have to ride it. And I'm not saying this is any plug to some online retailer where you can buy. I'm saying this in the fact that like I run a tall seat on my 350 because it's easier to stand and sit. And again, we were talking about this earlier, but like if you're on a dirt bike and we're riding off road, you're moving around. You're never sitting still. You're never just plodding along. Like you're standing up, you're sitting down, you're standing up, you're throwing your weight down to plant into a corner. You're kicking your leg out. You're dabbing. It's all this kinds of stuff. And then with that, it's also about your handlebars. How tall do you want them? How low do you want them? I know a lot of people automatically are like, oh, well, you're 6'3", you probably use bar risers. I hate bar risers. Like, I don't need to stand up completely straight on my dirt bike or my adventure bike. That's a myth. If you're riding aggressively off-road, you're probably in more of an aggressive crouch position anyway. Does my lower back hurt at the end of the day? Yes. But if I'm riding bar risers are so tall that I can't get the bike to do what I want it to do regardless. And I'm not saying that they're wrong. Again, this is if you're more comfortable riding with bar risers, then by all means, go for it. But I like a lower, flatter bar. I like a tall seat, and I want a giant foot peg. So I don't know if you've ever seen the rally pegs that you can get I'm just going to say the name, but my KTM adventure bike had these large, giant rally pegs on it, and that was awesome because I have a size 12.5 boot. Right, so like I've got this giant honking stupid boot, and on a tiny little foot peg, it's a pain in the butt. Jen was with me at Get On Adventure Fest when I was on that BMW F850 GS. The foot peg, and for those of you listening, I'm making a very small motion with my hand. The foot pegs were like 3 inches long by like a half an inch wide. My feet were sore at the end of the day. They were sliding off. Like, it's just not the same, right? Like, so it's all those little things you don't necessarily think about. But yeah, for a dirt bike, it's usually handlebars, lower and flatter. I want a taller seat, and then I want to make sure that I have a wider peg. The other part that I just want to end with is, I get the question a lot from people of like, you went with a 350 instead of the 500. Why is that? I want to do long distance on my 500. You're never going to do long distance on your 500. It's uncomfortable. It's not going to be appropriate. And the 350 is such a weapon that even though it's only a few pounds lighter, it feels like it's 50 pounds lighter, in my humble opinion. So like the 350 was the perfect middle ground for me. And after riding my friend's 250, Liz, who we were talking about earlier, she had a 250. I was like, I actually probably could have gone down to the 250 because like with that bike, I was like wide open at every single turn. I was having so much fun because there was like, you could really, like we were talking about earlier, hit the limits on that bike and have a great time with it. With a 350, like I put a throttle tamer on the 350. Like I'm trying to, because on the seat, on like a wide open path, like it's all the power. I'm sorry, I'm getting really excited about this one now. But with like, you can jump it, you can hit it, you can have a great time. But on the tighter single track, it's too much power. So that's where the throttle tamer comes into play. We're like, and for those of you listening, a throttle tamer reduces the lobe of the throttle. So in the first quarter turn of the throttle, it actually reduces power input by about 15%. So that way, if you're in a tight single track situation, you can go and whack the throttle a bit harder without having the bike completely get away from you. And then we can get into another podcast about gearing discussions and all that jazz. But I'm going to shut the hell up. For ergonomics, it would be seat height, handlebars, and foot pegs for me.
Yeah, I think those are good notes because, dirt bikes sometimes feels like they don't have a lot of adjustability for that kind of thing, and you sort of forget that you can change how you fit on the bike by changing those things, and that's important to remember. And as Spurge says, whatever works for you is good, because the bikes are not they're not as different, right? Like if you buy an enduro bike from one brand or another brand or a different displacement, they're pretty similar compared to like, I'm going to get a Kawasaki versus X300 or KTM 1090. Like those are both quote unquote adventure bikes, but those are extremely different like sizes and like whatever. They're just so different.
I would say too that the one thing to note that I did not mention is spring rate. So like, and I guess I'm the representative of the larger rider here. Most of these dirt bikes are set up for someone that weighs about 150 to 170 pounds. And if you're coming in at 220, and each spring rate, I think, is like a 7-pound increment. So like if you're 220, 230 pounds, you're probably like 3 or 4, if not more, spring rates higher than what comes on its stock. So that's normally my go-to is before I ever take the bike off the showroom floor, I have the appropriate spring weight put into the suspension, because otherwise it's like riding a pogo stick. Now I'm done. Now I'm officially
an important
done.
call out.
Yeah, it's a good note for small riders as well, Jen. I know that you on that Ducati Monster, you were like, oh man, that the softer spring was so much better for you, right?
It makes a difference. I mean, obviously, it's going to help with the ride just to have the suspension set up for you. But and especially on a dirt bike, it helps kind of lower the bike for me just from getting the settings right. Because as Spurge mentioned, it's like normally 150 to 160 pound rider or whatever that they set up all these bikes for. Well, like with all my gear on, like I weigh in at like 120. So like I was at like a Husky ride day actually, and they were doing really cool stuff with the suspension for all the riders. And then when they got to me, they're like, oh shoot, like Jen would actually, they're like, Jen would need like one of the 85cc springs. And we didn't bring any, like that was a real thing. So it's like, for all of our riders and audience out there, like get your suspension set up right for you. Cause that might solve a lot of your problems when it comes to seat heights or, managing the bike.
Yeah, you made a great point too that it's how much you weigh with your gear on, right? Like if you're carrying a hydration pack that weighs anywhere from 15 to 20 pounds, if you got tools in there, you got motocross boots on, you got a full rig, you got a helmet, you're now not a 220 pound rider, you're a 250 pound rider, and it exponentially changes when you factor in all of the gear that you normally ride with. So I like that call out as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. Well, I will reiterate what Spurge said about a KTM 500 EXC, which is that I rode one time and I was like, holy Moses, who is this for?
Well, terrain, right? Like,
yeah,
so,
I mean,
you know,
or if you want to go 100 miles an hour across the desert, I guess.
Yeah, it's for desert racers.
I mean, that's what, like, you know, when I worked sales in the Southwest, and the 501s outsold the 350s, you know, like easily. But that's because there's so much desert racing and desert riding out here. You know, we're, you know, Spurge and Philly and all those gorgeous trees and all that single track, like that's the type of riding you do. But for a lot of riders in the Southwest, it's so wide open. So the 501 works, you know.
Yeah.
To be clear to Jen's point, there's not beautiful trees and single track in Philadelphia. We have to drive about an hour outside the city to get to it. So
yeah, fair enough. People also, I don't know if you'd agree with this, Jen, but like people like to be gnarly too. Like, you know, it's the same reason people buy an R1 instead of an R7. Like, are people riding an R7 and they're like, I'm in 6th gear at Redline, I need a faster bike. Like I'm trying to get where I need to go and I'm maxed out on this machine. I don't think so. They want the gnarliest, baddest ass business.
I would say that in the defense of 501 riders out here in the Southwest, though, it's not like when you go to a track, right, and there's corners and there's turns and everything. It's just a big desert playground. And man, if they want to find the red line on that 501 out at Ocotillo, they can do it, and they do. So
I do think
I'll give them the credit.
I do think it's important to note that, like, from my experience, and this is completely anecdotal, because now we're just having fun, is that I do think that there's an element of dirt riders that buy the right bike more so than we see on the street, right? Like I feel like it might not be the first one, but even when people are buying their first dirt bike, they typically do a lot of research into like, well, this is the kind of terrain that I'm riding, and they get the right bike to match it. Now, there's exceptions to all rules, but Jen, I'd be interested if you agree or disagree with that based on, you know, your sales background and your off-road background, because that's the way that I see it a little bit, at least, is maybe a more appropriate way of going about it.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like with dirt bike riding, it kind of forces you to buy the right bike. Because here's the thing. This is the example I always give. Like, I could go to a road race track and, like, no matter what, I know I could get around it. Like, I know how to ride on asphalt. Like, I'm going to safely circumvent this track, right? There's literally motocross tracks out there that I don't know that I would actually be able to ride its entirety, just because of the gnarly ruts or the hills, or, you know, like they're like on a supercross track. It's hard even for a rider like me to just roll along and through a supercross track. Like, maybe I'll make it, maybe I won't, but like there's a very like clearly more difficult level when it comes to dirt bikes of just simply riding.
Yeah.
So that's how I feel about it. Like, you're going to learn real quick. Like, you need a dirt bike that's the appropriate tool for the job. Whereas on street bikes, like, you could get away with a lot more on a street bike in a variety of environments.
Yeah.
That's my experience anyway.
Good point.
Zach, is there anything that you want to add to the off-road conversation before we wrap up this episode?
I don't think so. I think the fact that we're talking about we're not talking about how tall or small people are anymore is an indication that we've exhausted not that we've talked about literally everything possible. Maybe someone's screaming at their phone right now being like, tell me about but we covered a bunch of topics. We talked about, you know, riding in the city, riding long distances, sport bikes, off-road bikes, that kind of thing. I feel like we got some really interesting nuggets of knowledge from Jen about how to approach whether it's buying a bike or riding a bike, depending on the terrain and skill level. So I like it. I think we've done the best job we can today.
Jen, before we bid you adieu, do you have any last little nuggets or facts or tips for our audience that you want to share?
I think what I've gotten out of this conversation with you guys as well, from your perspectives, is let's modify and change our bikes so they work for us, and don't worry if the photo looks silly, or if some other experienced rider told you absolutely can't lower that bike or whatever. Like it's your ride. It's for your enjoyment. It's your life. It's your ride. I think in this day and age, like, we have so many options now to make our bikes fit us better. So go ahead and do it and have fun.
Well said. No, I guess I want to leave you with the fact that, like, it's hard for tall people too. Yes, we can get on all the rides at the amusement park, but we have our own set of difficulties up here in the sky.
Sure, we get paid more, but look, we hit our heads on things sometimes. Just kidding.
Oh my God.
Well, yeah, thanks very much for joining today, Jen. That was a lot of fun. And whether you like it or not, again, you're going to be back.
Wonderful. Looking forward to it.
Tell your parents we said we're sorry. Always a pleasure having Jen Dunstan on the podcast. Hopefully we didn't get her in too much trouble with mom and dad back at home. So we are now going to move into the high side, low side listeners comment section. And Zach, how about you take the first one?
Okie dokie. First one is from Brendan. You know who you are. No last name. But Brendan says, I'd be interested to hear your personal takes on how integrated motorcycles are in your daily lives. Obviously, you earn your living on them, but are they something you still see as primarily fun, useful mode of transportation? Do you still choose a bike over a car if it's raining and you have to get somewhere? So this Brendan's really holding our feet to the fire.
Well, I think
do we put our figurative money where our literal mouths are?
It's a great question, and I think it really probably further shows that you and I are probably going to have different answers for this, because you live in Southern California where it very rarely rains, and I live in Philadelphia where like it rains at least once a week. And the answer for the rain question is no. Like I have a Toyota Tacoma, and if it's raining, like I'm not going to put myself through that. Now, if I'm out on a trip or taking an adventure ride or something like that, and it's a rainy day, like yes, absolutely, I'm still going to ride. I don't shy away from it. But if I'm sitting in the comfort of my living room and I have to get to work that day or go to the grocery store that day, I'm gonna take the truck.
Grocery store in the rain on a motorcycle is. No, I draw the line there. Well, like before I had a car, I would literally just not get groceries. I'd be like, well, it's going to happen tomorrow or the next day or whenever it's not raining, because I'd like, that is just like not, I mean, if it's like drizzling or something, I would do it, but like a hard rain,
still
like
pretty miserable.
It's pretty brutal.
No, when I moved to Southern California, and this is a little bit of a tidbit for the audience, I didn't have a car, and I've talked about this before on the podcast, but where it really became interesting was like, if you were having a first date with somebody and you had to explain like, hey, I'm going to pick you up on this completely different vehicle, or going to the grocery store, or even like the gym, right? Because like you think about it, like the gym, you have to like pack a gym bag, take it down, versus like getting changed at home and then going to the gym. But the grocery store was like, take the throw-over saddlebags out to the Bonneville, put the throw-over saddlebags on. Like I remember at times like shoving potato chips like down the jacket, or like a gallon of milk, or like a case of beer strapped to the back, like
boxes of cereal in your jacket because like, oh, it won't fit in my backpack or whatever.
Like, dude, I mean, backpack, saddlebags, like top little duffel bag, case of beer strapped on top of it, and like that's how I would go grocery shopping. So I did find myself accommodating and making like smaller grocery runs more often.
Yeah, absolutely. That's how I lived my life for a long time. I mean, I always had cars in my kind of ecosystem. Like I had a roommate or the person I was dating or whatever that had a car that I could borrow if I really needed one. But I lived in San Francisco for 4 years and with just a motorcycle. And I moved to LA and only had a motorcycle for a number of more years. I don't remember. I bought my first car. I still have my first car. It's also a Toyota Tacoma that I bought when I was 31 years old, I think. So yeah, I went all through my 20s with just a motorcycle. And I had the same experience. I remember like stuffing cereal in my jacket after the grocery store. Like I rode to rec league soccer games. I played college soccer. And when I moved to San Francisco, I joined men's league soccer teams, co-ed soccer teams. And I played soccer 2 to 4 times a week for a few years. And I didn't like, honestly, like it sucked because you go to a soccer game and you get sweaty and then you have to put your gear back on to get home. And so it was always this like strategic, like I would make sure to have a long sleeve shirt to wear underneath my jacket so my jacket didn't get all stinky and sweaty and sticky or whatever. So I would have a balaclava under my helmet so that my sweaty hair didn't get the liner of my helmet all gross. So yeah, it was a pain in the tail.
It was arguably, honestly, like I think back to like my love affair with motorcycles, and speaking completely truthfully, like at times it would have been a lot easier to just have a car and say, I'm just going to do this in a car. There's been times where I've been out on a trip and it's like, it's rained for 5 days straight. It's my 5th day putting wet gear on. And I'm like, why didn't I bring the Camry? Like
Why didn't I just buy
why
a
am I
Corolla?
doing this to myself, you know? But at the end of the day, the sun comes out and you know, you're happy that you're there. So I guess the long to short answer for Brendan's question is that like I would say that at my current age and status, I probably don't commute as much on a motorcycle as I used to. You know, I probably am a little bit more guilty of like hopping in the car where there's air conditioning or if it's raining out to go back and forth to the office or to get groceries. But I like to think that on a large scale, like I'm still pretty much the person that can find joy in motorcycling in all situations.
Yeah, and not to one up Spurge too much, but I feel like my little pickup truck sits under a cover most of the time, and I ride almost everywhere. And I do live in Southern California where the weather is easier to deal with on a motorcycle. But I definitely have days when I think like, yeah, air conditioning would be nice, or it'd be easier to run that errand. But I don't know. What I find is I like my mindset when I'm in the helmet, and I get a lot of joy from participating in the activity of motorcycling, and so I sometimes I think like I'm gonna get sweaty, I'm gonna get sticky, it's too hot, or you know, this is gonna be kind of annoying on the bike, but like I know that I'm gonna like it, so I do it, and yeah, I like to think that it's integral. Although I will admit to occasionally wanting to spend a weekend not riding or not talking about motorcycles because it takes up a lot of my work week.
I honestly,
which I feel very fortunate for. But
no, 100%. But I think the biggest advantage that you have, and I'm very jealous of this, is that you get to lane split in Southern California. And I think for me, if I'm going to have to be sitting in traffic for 45 minutes on the Schuylkill Expressway, and if I'm either going to be sitting in traffic, because I don't believe in illegally lane splitting. I know some people out there do it. I'm not going to say I've never done it, but like it just continues a bad rap experience for people that, you know, already don't like motorcyclists. But in Southern California, being on a motorcycle is such an advantage because you can get places faster. You can commute easier. Like I couldn't live in Southern California and not be a motorcyclist. And every time I go out there, I see all those people in cars. I'm like, why are you doing this to yourselves? Get on two wheels, people.
I mean, frankly, especially in Northern California, especially when I live in San Francisco, like I said, it's a small city and parking's a pain and it's trafficy sometimes, and just like getting around the city on a motorcycle is just, or a scooter is just so great in my opinion. And it's often not as hot. So
I think parking is another one too. Like even in Philadelphia, like I'll find myself taking the motorcycle into the city because I live a little bit on the outskirts. Like because parking, they've got designated spots. You can kind of park anywhere you want, really. You can kind of squeeze in between two cars. Like I do agree with you. The parking makes it much more desirable to take a motorcycle for a city.
Yep. Yeah, fair enough.
Hopefully that answers your question, Brendan.
Yeah, thank you. Good question there, Brendan. Hope you're satisfied with that. High side, low side comment number 2. I guess it's your turn. You go ahead, Spurge.
I was just going to say, so just so you're aware, these comments come in via highside, lowside at RevZilla.com. So these are people that have sent us emails, and we would love for you to send us an email too. And if you write us a particularly intriguing comment, we might even discuss it on the podcast, much like we're going to do with Russell's email. Russell wrote in from Australia. He called us lads. That's not the right accent, but he called us lads. I'd like to hear some anecdotes from you guys in regards to tire wear. He's talking about different style bikes, tire manufacturers, compounds that are most interesting to, you know, what kind of wear and mileage. And he gave the example, he's gotten mates who have gotten 15 to 20,000 kilometers. We can tell we're dealing with an Aussie at this point, out of original tires on bikes like MT-07s and CB650s. Yet his 96 Ducati 916 will destroy rear tires in under 5,000 kilometers, which is roughly 3,000 miles for those of you Americans out there. Yet the front holds up okay. So, Zach, what's the story here? Why are some people getting 10,000 miles, 12,000 miles out of a tire, but poor Russell's only getting about 3?
Too many burnouts, Russell. I see you.
916.
You can't help but do the burnouts, and that's the problem with your tire. So the bottom line here is tire selection for the type of bike and riding that you're doing. So a bike, some bikes will come with tires that are going to last longer. And a recommended, quote unquote, recommended tire for a 96 Ducati 916, which, by the way, good choice bike there, Russell. I'd love to take that sucker for a spin.
Have a pint with you.
A recommended tire for that kind of bike is going to be a Hypersport tire, which is much softer and is going to wear out quicker. Maybe Russell already knows this, but for everyone's edification, the main driver of how long a tire will last is what it was designed to do. And we wanted to say that our friend Ari Henning, who we already mentioned, Common Tread articles by Ari Henning, he wrote a great article called, what was it called?
Why you should buy sport touring tires instead of Hypersport tires. And it was a phenomenal article.
Right. And the bottom line is people will often buy Pirelli Super Corsas or Dunlop Q3s or some kind of sticky sport tire to put on their sport bike because they think that's what they need. And those tires are good if you're riding really aggressively. I mean, if you're going to go to a track day or something like that, those are good tires. But if you're not, then you don't need those tires. And like my bike, I put dual compound sport touring tires on my Supermoto for years because that's what made sense, because it has a harder compound in the middle and it's just going to last longer.
And you still get all the grip out of them. So I'm a huge
I mean, you
fan
get enough grip for riding on the street, you know, for an MT-07 or even a 916 that you're riding on the street. It's going to be plenty of grip.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because depending on the generation MT-07 that your buddy's riding, it probably came with Pilot Road 5s on it or Pilot Road 4s-ish.
Yep.
I know that they're using those tires on a lot of different things, but that's one of my favorite tires. I've used the Pilot Road 2s and 3s. I never used the 4s, and I used the 5s. And it's just, I mean, for as hard as you want to ride on the street, they're going to give you all the grip you could possibly need in all different kinds of weather. And like Zach said, that harder strip down the middle means you're going to get 7, 8, 10,000 miles out of a rear, which is, it's nicer than having to change your tires every 3,000 miles.
Yep.
So check out that article from Ari Henning. He kind of just confirms what we're saying and makes sure that that Zach and I aren't talking out of our ass.
Quick note. Russell also mentioned that noticed that front tires. He noticed that front tires seem to wear out quickly too. So that'll also be, especially he mentioned FZ1000 and a Z900 RS, I think. So those are heavy-ish bikes. A lot of times you'll see fronts wearing quickly and cupping wearing kind of unevenly on sport touring bikes, like something big and heavy, like a BMW RT or a
Concourse
Yamaha.
14 was notorious for eating front tires.
Yep. Or a Yamaha FJR 1300 or something like that. Those are just big, heavy bikes, and when you go through a set of curves, it puts a lot of pressure on that front tire, and the rubber can wear unevenly, especially from weight.
So also check your tire pressures.
I would say next.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's very important.
Sorry.
No, please continue.
No, I was just saying, I think that's the biggest misconception is that from my days working in the dealership, we'd have people come in and be like, yeah, the bike's not handling right. And there'd be 18 pounds of pressure in the front tire. We're not doing a track day here, people. You're on a 700-pound touring motorcycle. So run and regularly check your tire pressure. Check your tire pressure once a week. You lose some over time. So that's number one cause for the cupping that Zach's talking about.
Right. So hopefully that helps. Again, specifically talking to Russ in Australia, we hope that we're not patronizing you too much. You probably know a lot of this stuff already, but hopefully that helps, and it helps other people who might have the same question.
So if you want to reach out to us, again, you can shoot us an email to highsidelowside@RevZilla.com. You can always leave us a comment on YouTube. Zach and I do our best to browse through all the comments you're putting there on YouTube. And please make sure you subscribe to wherever you get your podcast. Make sure you subscribe and make sure you're tuning in every other week when we release these new episodes. And as always, leave us a review on Apple Podcasts.
Because if you do, you could be like Mo Doug No, who left a review in Apple Podcasts. And Mo Doug No is going to get a free Highside Lowside t-shirt if they send an email to highsidelowside@RevZilla.com with a size and address.
Zach, we did it again. We got through another episode. My God.
Survived.
Look at us.
Survived. Well, thanks so much for watching. As always, thanks to Jen for joining us. And with any luck, you will hear us again soon here on Highside Lowside.